It was the dead of night. Just outside a small town in Maine, there was an old mansion turned inn known as the Silent House. The locals spoke in hushed tones about a particular room in the inn, room 13, where anyone who stayed never returned alive. But most dismissed it as nothing more than an urban legend. Jack Carter, a young adventurer and self-proclaimed skeptic, was traveling through the area. Fascinated by the stories, he decided to spend a night at the Silent House. When the innkeeper, an elderly man named Mr. Grayson, warned Jack to stay away from room 13, it only fueled his curiosity. "Is it really haunted, or are you just trying to scare me?" Jack smirked. Mr. Grayson's face turned pale. "That room has a history, son. If you value your life, stay out of it." But Jack was determined. That night, when the inn fell silent and everyone else was asleep, he made his way to the infamous room 13. The door was closed, but from inside he heard faint whispers and the sound of something lightly tapping against the floor. It sent a chill down his spine, but his curiosity pushed him forward. Taking a deep breath, Jack turned the doorknob and stepped inside. The room was eerily cold and dimly lit, even though there was no visible light source. The walls seemed to move with shadows that danced unnaturally, as if alive. In the center of the room stood a large antique mirror. The glass shimmered faintly, but when Jack looked into it, he realized with a jolt his reflection wasn't there. Suddenly, a voice echoed in the room, low and menacing. Jack spun around, searching for the source of the voice, but the room was empty. He turned back toward the mirror just as something reached out from inside it, a pale, clawed hand. Jack screamed and tried to run, but the door slammed shut behind him. The hand gripped his wrist, pulling him closer to the glass. Jack fought with all his strength, but the mirror's surface rippled like water and began to consume him. The next morning, Mr. Grayson cautiously opened the door to room 13. It was empty, except for the mirror, which now held Jack's reflection. His face was frozen in terror, his mouth open in a silent scream, as if begging for help. The legend of room 13 grew after that day. Guests claimed to hear Jack's faint voice at night, whispering from the mirror, "Help me! Get me out of here!" But no one who dared to investigate room 13 ever came back. Years passed, and the Silent House remained an urban legend. Locals avoided the inn, and tourists who dared to stay always requested rooms far from room 13. But the story of Jack Carter, the young adventurer who vanished, was still whispered in the town. One rainy night, a woman named Emily Bennett, a journalist with a reputation for investigating paranormal mysteries, arrived at the Silent House. She had heard about room 13 and Jack Carter's disappearance and was determined to uncover the truth. As Emily walked into the dimly lit lobby, she noticed Mr. Grayson, now frail and hunched with age, sitting behind the reception desk. His hands trembled as he handed her the guest book. "Are you sure you want to stay here, miss? Most people leave as soon as they hear the stories." His voice was weak but filled with concern. "I'm not like most people," Emily replied with a confident smile. "I've heard about room 13. That's the room I want." Mr. Grayson's eyes widened in horror. "You don't understand. That room is cursed. People don't come back from there. Please choose another room." But Emily was persistent. She slid a stack of cash across the desk. "I need the truth. I'll be fine." Reluctantly, Mr. Grayson handed her the key to room 13. His hand shook as he whispered, "May God help you." Emily entered room 13, her flashlight slicing through the thick darkness. The air was cold, and the walls seemed to hum faintly, as if alive. She set up her recording equipment, determined to capture any paranormal activity. The antique mirror stood in the center of the room, just as she had heard. Its surface was cracked slightly, and a faint glow seemed to emanate from within. Emily stared into it, and for a moment her reflection appeared. Off. The movements didn't align perfectly with her own. She turned to adjust her camera, but when she glanced back at the mirror, her reflection was smiling, and she wasn't. Her heart raced. She grabbed her flashlight and aimed it at the mirror. Suddenly, a whisper filled the room, soft and chilling. "Emily, you shouldn't have come." The door slammed shut behind her, and the air grew heavy. Shadows began to move along the walls, twisting and writhing like living creatures. Emily's breath quickened as she tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, now overlapping voices that seemed to echo inside her head. "Help us. Set us free. Don't trust the mirror." Emily turned back to the mirror and saw something that froze her in place. Inside the glass, dozens of faces stared back at her, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. At the center of them all was Jack Carter, his hand pressed against the glass, his lips forming the words, "Run, before it's too late." Suddenly, the clawed hand emerged from the mirror again, this time grabbing Emily's arm. She screamed, struggling to break free, but the pull was too strong. The voices grew louder, deafening, as the mirror began to ripple and swirl like a vortex. Emily felt herself being dragged into the glass. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, she grabbed her camera and threw it across the room. Emily's breath quickened as she tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, now overlapping voices that seemed to echo inside her head. "Help us. Set us free. Don't trust the mirror." Emily turned back to the mirror and saw something that froze her in place. Inside the glass, dozens of faces stared back at her, their eyes hollow, their mouths open in silent screams. At the center of them all was Jack Carter, his hand pressed against the glass, his lips forming the words, "Run, before it's too late." Suddenly, the clawed hand emerged from the mirror again, this time grabbing Emily's arm. She screamed, struggling to break free, but the pull was too strong. The voices grew louder, deafening, as the mirror began to ripple and swirl like a vortex. Emily felt herself being dragged into the glass. Just as she was about to lose consciousness, she grabbed her camera and threw it across the room, hoping someone would find it. Then everything went black. The next morning, Mr. Grayson found the door to room 13 ajar. He hesitated before stepping inside. The room was empty, just as it always was after someone vanished. But this time, there was a camera lying on the floor, its red light still blinking. With trembling hands, he picked it up and played the recording. The footage showed Emily entering the room, setting up her equipment, and then chaos. The shadows, the voices, the hand emerging from the mirror, it was all there. The final frame showed Emily being pulled into the glass, her face twisted in terror. Mr. Grayson stared at the mirror. For the first time, he noticed something new. Among the dozens of trapped faces inside, there was now Emily, her eyes pleading, her hand pressed against the glass, silently begging for freedom. The camera footage was never released. Mr. Grayson locked room 13 forever, but the legend only grew. They say on stormy nights, if you stand outside the silent house, you can still hear the whispers. "Help us. Don't trust the mirror." Years passed, and the silent house fell into complete disrepair. Locals avoided it altogether, claiming they could hear faint whispers and see flickering lights in the windows of room 13, even though the inn had been abandoned. But every legend attracts someone bold enough or foolish enough to seek the truth. This time, it was Mark Sullivan, a tech-savvy paranormal investigator and host of the hit YouTube channel Beyond the Veil. Mark had heard of Emily Bennett's disappearance and had even managed to dig up rumors of the lost footage from her camera. He decided to find room 13 and finally uncover the truth for his millions of followers. Armed with state-of-the-art equipment, thermal cameras, motion detectors, and a drone, Mark arrived at the silent house on a cold, rainy night. The building loomed. They say on stormy nights, if you stand outside the silent house, you can still hear the whispers. "Help us. Don't trust the mirror." Years passed, and the silent house fell into complete disrepair. Locals avoided it altogether, claiming they could hear faint whispers and see flickering lights in the windows of room 13, even though the inn had been abandoned. But every legend attracts someone bold enough or foolish enough to seek the truth. This time, it was Mark Sullivan, a tech-savvy paranormal investigator and host of the hit YouTube channel Beyond the Veil. Mark had heard of Emily Bennett's disappearance and had even managed to dig up rumors of the lost footage from her camera. He decided to find room 13 and finally uncover the truth for his millions of followers. Armed with state-of-the-art equipment, thermal cameras, motion detectors, and a drone, Mark arrived at the silent house on a cold, rainy night. The building loomed over him like a dark shadow, its broken windows resembling hollow eyes. As he entered the inn, his camera was already live streaming to thousands of viewers. "All right, folks," Mark said, his voice steady despite the eerie silence around him. "This is it, the legendary Silent House. Tonight, we're going to find out what really happened to Emily Bennett, and maybe even Jack Carter." The stream's chat was buzzing with excitement and warnings. "Don't go in there. This is a bad idea. Mark. If you see the mirror, run!" Mark ignored the warnings. He was here for answers and views. The building groaned as he made his way upstairs. Cobwebs lined the walls, and the air was thick with mildew. When he reached the door to room 13, he paused. The rusted number 13 hung crookedly, as if trying to fall off and erase its existence. Mark placed his hand on the doorknob, then turned to the camera. "Here we go, everyone. The truth behind room 13 awaits." The door creaked open, revealing the room. It was exactly as described, cold, dark, and empty, except for the ominous mirror standing in the center. Mark's thermal camera picked up strange readings. The room seemed colder near the mirror, and faint heat signatures moved along the walls, as if something invisible was watching him. "Do you guys see that?" Mark whispered, showing the camera the thermal screen. The chat exploded with messages. "There's something there! Get out, Mark! The mirror! Look at the mirror!" Mark turned to face the mirror, his flashlight illuminating its cracked surface. His reflection stared back at him, but something wasn't right. The reflection's eyes were dark, and its smile was twisted. Suddenly, the live stream glitched, the screen filling with static. When the feed came back, Mark was standing completely still, his eyes fixed on the mirror. His voice was barely audible as he murmured, "It's calling me. I see them." The chat was in chaos. "Mark, snap out of it. Don't touch the mirror." But it was too late. A clawed hand emerged from the mirror, just as it had for Emily and Jack. It grabbed Mark by the shoulder, pulling him closer to the glass. Mark screamed, breaking free for a moment. He stumbled back, grabbing his camera and yelling into it, "It's alive! The mirror! Don't come here! Burn this place down!" But the shadows closed in around him, dragging him toward the mirror. His screams grew louder, then cut off abruptly as the mirror rippled and consumed him. The live stream ended with the camera falling to the ground, its lens cracked. Somewhere in a dark, hidden room, the shattered fragments of the mirror lie in a wooden crate. And late at night, if you listen closely, you can still hear whispers. A year after the fire that consumed the silent house, rumors began to swirl about a mysterious artifact recovered from the ashes, the shattered remains of the infamous mirror from room 13. A wealthy collector of occult artifacts, Jonathan Hargrove, had acquired the fragments at a secret auction and shipped them to his sprawling estate in upstate New York. Jonathan, a man obsessed with legends and curses, saw the broken mirror as the crown jewel of his collection. He believed the stories of trapped souls were nothing more than exaggerated folklore. With the help of a skilled craftsman, he began the painstaking process of restoring the mirror. As the fragments were pieced back together, strange occurrences began to plague Jonathan's home. Lights flickered, objects moved on their own, and at night, faint whispers echoed through the hallways. "You shouldn't have brought us here." Jonathan dismissed these as coincidences, until the mirror was finally complete. The restored mirror was placed in Jonathan's private study, a grand room filled with ancient books and eerie artifacts. That night, as he admired his work, Jonathan noticed something peculiar. His reflection in the mirror was delayed. When he waved his hand, the image mimicked the gesture a second too late. Intrigued, he leaned closer. The surface of the mirror seemed to ripple slightly, like water disturbed by a breeze. Jonathan chuckled nervously and turned off the lights, but the whispers grew louder that night. In his dreams, he saw faces, hollow-eyed, desperate, and screaming. Among them were Emily Bennett, Jack Carter, and Mark Sullivan. Jonathan woke in a cold sweat, the whispers still echoing in his ears. He decided he needed to investigate the mirror's history further. Jonathan delved into old newspaper archives, police reports, and local legends. What he found sent chills down his spine. Every account of the mirror was linked to disappearances, death, or madness. It wasn't just Room 13, it was the mirror itself. Its origins were traced back to the late 1800s, when it had been crafted by a reclusive artist named Victor Langley. Langley was rumored to have dabbled in the occult, and it was said he had used human blood to create the mirror's unique sheen. Shortly after completing it, Langley was found dead in his workshop, his body twisted in unnatural ways, and his face frozen in terror. From that moment on, the mirror changed hands many times, leaving a trail of horror and despair in its wake. It wasn't a cursed object, it was alive. As Jonathan pieced together the mirror's dark past, the activity in his home grew worse. Shadows moved without light, books flew off shelves, and every time he passed the mirror, he felt eyes watching him, more than just his own reflection. One night, he woke to find the mirror glowing faintly. As he approached, he saw dozens of faces staring back at him. They weren't just reflections, they were souls trapped within the glass. Jonathan stepped back in horror as the faces began to chant in unison, "Set us free before it's too late." But then, a deeper, more guttural voice boomed from the mirror. "They are mine. You cannot save them." The room shook violently, and the mirror began to crack, small fractures forming across its surface. Jonathan grabbed a nearby book and hurled it at the mirror. The glass shattered into hundreds of pieces, and a deafening scream filled the room. For a moment, everything was silent. Jonathan thought he had destroyed the mirror, but as he turned to leave the room, he froze. Standing in the doorway was a figure, a tall, shadowy man with glowing red eyes. "You've made a grave mistake," the figure growled. "The mirror was the vessel. Now I am free." Jonathan tried to run, but the figure raised a hand, and Jonathan was lifted off the ground, gasping for air. The shadowy figure leaned closer, its voice a chilling informant. "You thought the curse was in the mirror. The curse is me." The figure disappeared, leaving Jonathan lying on the floor, gasping for breath. When he looked around, the shards of the mirror had vanished, and the house was eerily quiet. But Jonathan knew the entity wasn't gone. It was loose in the world now, free to wreak havoc. Months later, strange deaths began to be reported across the country. Victims were found with twisted, unnatural expressions of terror on their faces and shattered glass near their bodies. Each scene bore the same chilling detail, a faint whisper that lingered in the air. The legend of Room 13 had spread beyond the confines of the silent house. The curse was no longer contained. Some say the mirror is still out there, its shards scattered across the globe, each piece carrying a fragment of the entity's power. And if you ever see your reflection in a broken piece of glass, beware. It might not just be your reflection looking back. The secret of Room 13 teaches us a chilling lesson. Some mysteries are better left unsolved. Humanity's unending curiosity often leads us into darkness we are not prepared to face. Just because something can be discovered doesn't mean it should be. The story warns us about the dangers of obsession, greed, and arrogance. From Jack Carter's adventurous spirit to Emily Bennett's relentless pursuit of the truth, and Jonathan Hargrove's insatiable desire to possess the unknown, each character fell victim to their inability to heed warnings and respect boundaries. The mirror symbolizes the hidden horrors of the unknown, things that are beyond our comprehension or control. And as the curse spreads into the world, the moral becomes even clearer. When we play with forces we don't understand, we may unleash evils we can never contain. The story ends with a haunting reminder. Sometimes curiosity doesn't just kill, it condemns. Please guys, don't forget to subscribe our channel for more enjoyable stories.